Today we'll be reading about self-surrender from Reality at Dawn book. We practice bhakti or devotion in order to achieve communion with the Supreme Master. We look upon him with faith and reverence. By degrees, we become so closely intimate to him that every other object loses prominence in our eyes. This is submission to the will of the Master, or in other words, the beginning of self-surrender. It goes on developing as our faith grows stronger. It brings us to a stationary condition, stopping the oscillations of the mind. I'll repeat again, this is very important. It's a question of practice only, is telling. We practice bhakti or devotion in order to achieve communion with the Supreme Master. We look upon him with faith and reverence. By degrees, we become so closely intimate to him that every other object loses prominence in our eyes. This is submission to the will of the Master, or in other words, the beginning of self-surrender. It goes on developing as our faith grows stronger. It brings us to a stationary condition, stopping the oscillations of the mind. In due course, we begin to feel ourselves overpowered by some great force which drives our mind away from everything else. We become free of the unwanted activities, sticking all the time to the right functioning of the organs, indriyas. Self-surrender is nothing but a state of complete resignation to the will of the Master with total disregard of self. A permanent stay in this condition leads to the beginning of the state of negation. When we surrender ourselves to the great Master, we begin to attract a constant flow of the highest divine force from him. In this state, a man thinks or does only that which is his Master's will. He feels nothing in the world to be his belonging, but everything as a sacred trust from the Master. And he does everything, thinking it to be his Master's bidding. His will becomes completely subservient to the will of the Master. A beautiful example of surrender is presented to us by Bharata, son of Dasharatha, when he went to the forest along with the people of Ayodhya to induce his brother Rama to return. In reply to the entreaties of the people, Rama gravely replied that he would be quite willing to return to the capital, provided Bharata asked him to do so. All eyes were turned towards Bharata, who was himself there to induce him to return. But he calmly replied, "It is not for me to command, but only to follow." The Bhagavad Gita too deals with the state of surrender. It is not an ordinary thing to be achieved easily. I want people to note this. It is not an ordinary thing to be achieved easily. It begins after complete negation of all senses and faculties. Faculties means manasu, buddhi, ahankara, chitta. These are, when Babuji uses the word faculties, it means these things. It begins after complete negation of all senses and faculties, from which we proceed by elementary rules of devotion. We submit to our Master, thinking him to be a superhuman being. We love him with faith and reverence, trying by all means to attract his attention and favor. For this purpose, we connect our link with him in the light of the worldly relationship only for the sake of facility. We think of him as father, brother, master, or beloved. The process, if taken up in right earnest, is greatly helpful to a disciple. The strong link of attraction thus established leads him to a state of devotion and surrender. The conception of Guru as a mother is, in my opinion, by far the most appropriate and advantageous to a disciple. A mother is the very embodiment of love and affection. Only a mother's heart can forbear with patience all the troubles and miseries caused to her son, thinking all the while of trying to provide for her son's comfort and happiness. The same is the position of the real master or guru, who is the spiritual mother of the disciple. As such, the guru is always on the lookout for the spiritual welfare of the child, the disciple. It is due to the affectionate attachment of the guru with his disciple that the attention of the great father, with whom his spiritual mother is so closely connected, is directed towards him. A mother's affection is well known, but people know very little of the Guru's affection and still less of God's affection. The function of a mother and a true Guru are closely similar. A mother retains the child within her womb for a certain duration. The Guru too retains the spiritual child within his mental sphere for a certain duration. During this period, the disciple, like the baby in the womb, sucks his energy and gets nourishment from the spiritual waves of the Guru's thoughts. When the time matures, he is born in the brighter world, and thence his own spiritual life begins. If the disciple enters the mental sphere of the Guru, surrendering all his belongings to him, it takes only 7 months to deliver him to the brighter world. This is the point actually. 7 months, a person can be liberated. But the process is generally delayed for a considerable time because while in the Guru's mental sphere, the disciple retains the consciousness of his own thoughts and feelings. Thus, we find that the position of the Guru is much the same as that of the mother. The conception of the Guru as a spiritual mother promotes within us the feelings of love, reverence, and surrender, which are the main factors of a spiritual life. We'll pause here. It's all clear. Anything, question or anything?
So, sir, in Maharashtra also,
Ah,
the saints have referred their God as mother only.
okay.
Like Vithoba Pandharpur, Vithoba Pandharpur is considered as Vithu Mai. Vithu Mai
Okay.
means last Mai is basically I. I is mother.
Mother. Okay.
Or Vithu Mauli. Mauli is mother.
Okay. That's right. That's right. Sages have classified the disciples under two main heads, the Manamata and the Guru Mata. The former are those who approach the Guru with some particular worldly end in view, such as relief from worldly misery, desire for wealth, etc. They submit to him only so long as they are hopeful in the achievement of their desires. When they meet disappointment in this respect, they are off. For such disciples, the question of obedience or submission even does not arise. What to say of surrender? Guru Mata disciples are those who obey the commands of the Master in all matters and try to submit to his will in all possible ways. Submission begins with obedience. When we are deeply impressed by the great powers of a master of the higher attainments in spirituality, we feel inwardly inclined to follow his biddings. But often the effect remains upon us only when we are in his presence, and when we are away, we become unmindful of him. Repeated association with him for some time brings us in closer touch with the great soul, and his supremacy begins to be established in our heart. We accept him as our guide in all matters pertaining to our spiritual advancement. The result is that we remember him frequently. when we are perfectly convinced of his superior capabilities, only then our submission in the true sense begins. We go on with it and practice as we are directed. We think of pleasing him by our actions. The idea of right or wrong too begins to assume prominence in our heart, and we feel inclined to refrain from evil. We consequently adopt the line of virtue so that we might be able to please our great master. It is our primary motive, for we wish to be saved from the miseries of the next life. So far, we reserve to ourselves the right of discretion and are therefore responsible for all our actions, whether good or bad. At a higher stage of self-surrender, such a discretionary power becomes almost extinct, and a man does everything thinking it to be his master's will. The question of right or wrong does not at all arise in his mind, or it becomes absolutely certain that by following his master's will, he is doing the right thing, and he does nothing but the right, feeling it to be his master's will. So this is in short, we have to repeat again. It is the, we have to meditate on that, because the process of how to surrender is also given, steps in the process of surrender. He says, when we are convinced of his superior capabilities, then our real surrender in true sense begins, he says. Any questions or anything on that? Because
For surrender, we need to develop dependency, right?
uh, first obedience.
Okay.
Teacher is there. He's giving you homework. He's asking you to do 1 hour meditation in the morning, evening cleaning, bedtime prayer, 9 p.m. prayer. Oh, come what may, we should not shirk it. It's a discipline, physical discipline, and all that. And before bed, before sunrise, you have to first practice discipline. That is obedience. Later on, you then you start developing what is called an attitude. You have to take that whatever is happening to you, whatever thoughts and feelings are happening inside you, or whatever is happening in the external world also, which gets reflected in you, you have to take it that it is agreeable and acceptable to you. Suppose you in meditation you are restless, or suppose you got headache or fever, you should adopt an attitude that it is acceptable and agreeable to you. After that comes dependency. And when dependency is being practiced, which is also equivalent to a kind of a contentment, you can be alert and then practice contentment. And along with dependency or contentment, if you practice 7 months, you will be continuous grace will be pouring onto you. You will find that you will become numb actually. Thoughts will not be there, and then at some point surrender happens. Grace of God, God cannot keep quiet if you are continuously depending on Him. Then He wants to communicate with you. He wants to, communion happens actually. So, and when that thing happens, surrender happens, then you're liberated. Then the feeling that you are an independent self goes away, and work happens spontaneously. Doership goes away. So the first idea is we practice bhakti or devotion in order to achieve communion with the Supreme Master. We want to see that he communicates with us, we communicate with him. So that is the idea. So these are various stages. First, start with physical discipline, strictly following the practice without fail, without break. And then afterwards, once your mind becomes peaceful and calm, you feel like remembering him again and again. Constant remembrance develops. And then slowly, the dependency develops. And then dependency leads to surrender. Surrender just happens by the grace of God. You don't know that surrender has happened to you, but the side effects are that you will feel grateful and then you feel humble. Suppose you're working for the master also, you will feel that feeling of gratefulness for for being given a chance to work for the master. Even if you are helping anybody in the world also, like a doctor, I'm there, I'm treating a patient. So instead of feeling of pride, you will get a feeling of gratefulness that you have been given a chance to serve somebody and make somebody's life happy. But ego is there, you will inwardly try to uh, feel that you got a right to be praised or whatever. I mean, you will feel pride for helping others or whatever. So like that.
Oh,
Anything else, Prasad?
thank you, sir. Thank you.
तो डिवोशन है वो महाराष्ट्र में वो नामदेव का स्टोरी है ना बच्चे का वो मालूम है आपको
हाँ,
तो he requests his father to give him a chance to pray to God, and then when his father goes outside some village, he says, "You do this job," and then he gives
Prasad.
prasad, and then God doesn't take it. वो story bolo. I mean, it's a real incident which has happened actually.
Correct. So that when Vithoba, who is the
Vithoba, yes.
Vitthal, doesn't eat that prasad, then he says, I will not go from here until you eat it. And then he actually, Vithoba comes and eats because his willpower is so strong that he's not ready to understand anything else other than saying that if you
No,
are
I think
from my father,
he threatens to commit suicide
so
also.
he starts banging his head.
Huh?
He starts banging his head.
Uh,
And he says, if you can eat from my father's hand, then why don't you eat from my hand?
So God comes physically to eat the
Mm.
prasad.
There are
This is all.
several stories of saints related to, I mean, all were devotees of Vithoba. There is a story of Gora Kumbar also. So he's Kumbar means he all those mud pots he makes.
Potter.
Potter. So he's doing that constant remembrance so
His
thoroughly
son
and
comes.
continuously that he kills his own son in that mud.
Yes.
So he's not realizing what is happening around. So
Yes.
he's able to save him.
Right. So that's what when your devotion goes into love, then you become blind to the charms of the world. Your mind becomes so blissful and peaceful. Deriving pleasure from the material objects looks it's not worthwhile, or it's a you think that it's a kind of a madness to search for happiness when happiness is inside you only. So you become blind to the charms of the world if your devotion increases. So if you're practicing correctly, we have to note these changes in our mind. Anything else? धर्मेश और कुछ बोलना है क्या?
So just one thing, what Master has mentioned, right? As we practice what we feel Master has, right? Father, brother, Master, beloved, and then mother.
Depending on depending on your personal psychological preference, you can take any of these things. Like Babuji, here he is telling that mother is a better idea. If you think that God inside you is a mother and you are dependent on that is one. Other place he says you take God as a beloved and then you are a lover. He says that is the most superior form, because beloved and lover and beloved, they don't want any separation between them. They want to merge into each other's bodies actually. So that is one. So it all depends upon your personal psychology. Any of these things will help. Just for the
Keeps
sake of
changing.
developing, just for the sake of developing, uh, uh,
Attachment.
strengthening the link, that's all.
Hmm.
Depending on your personal psychology, you can adopt any of these methods. 9, uh, uh, these are in Navarasal, I mean, 9 different ways by which you can remember God. And like Jaya Vijaya, like they also remembered God as an enemy, but they got liberated. No? That is also a kind of remembrance. Hiranyakashipu and then Hiranyakshudu. They were devotees in earlier life. So they said they want to quickly reach back the homeland. So they were born as enemies of God. So constantly they abuse God, and that's also a kind of a constant. Anyway, you think it's beneficial.
Yeah, it is also said na, that Ravana had Virodhi Bhakti.
Virodhi Bhakti, yes.
Uh,
That is also accepted.
mm.
Okay, if nothing is there, we'll meet next Sunday then.